Boss demands I adopt her into my family, relentlessly pushing for invites to all events, risking my marriage and sanity. My manager, Wanda, is a director about 5 years younger than me. I'm 63, also a woman. She's been with our employer for over 20 years, and I can admit, she's exceptional at what she does. Her intense loyalty to her staff and her bottomless reservoir of knowledge about our work and government in general command real respect. But here's the trouble. Emotionally, Wanda has the maturity of a teenager. She is self-absorbed, desperately needy, and has never been in a romantic relationship. According to her, her parents were completely perfect and her childhood spotless, a legacy that, if you ask me, left her unable to trust any man outside her family. I wouldn't be surprised if a decent psychiatrist could write several dissertations on her. Not that Wanda would ever see one. Perfection, in her mind, is a done deal. When I joined this job, Wanda was in the thick of caring for her elderly parents, both frail and close to the end. She was under a mountain of stress, and, I'll admit, I fell into the trap of being the nurturing one. I had lost both my parents years earlier, and that empathy came naturally. What I didn't realize was just how tangled Wanda's inner world really was. I tried to be supportive. I'd listen to her talk about books, theater, or whatever else could distract her from her stress. I even invited her to a couple of concerts my spouse, him, and I were attending and, in a moment of weakness, extended an invitation to a family Christmas meal the year her second parent died. Wanda does have family in the area, a brother she barely tolerates and a beloved sister. That Christmas, her sister and brother-in-law were out of town, and she was obviously fishing for a way to avoid her brother's celebration. The hints were nearly comical until I finally caved. What followed was one very awkward holiday. My family is rowdy, irreverent, and loud. She's circumspect, reserved, and made it clear that our kind of Christmas was far outside her comfort zone. Still, the hints for more invites didn't stop. Ever since that awkward holiday, I've worked hard to ignore the hints. Even now, years later, Wanda continues to drop them at every opportunity, but I refuse to host her again. I've coordinated with family to shift hosting duties so that I'm not the one in charge of the guest list anymore. Outside of work, contact with Wanda has shrunk to a once-a-year concert and maybe a couple dinners. My spouse thinks that's far too much. Frankly, I agree. But Wanda is still my boss, and I'm well aware of the risks in pushing her away completely. A few weeks ago, she descended on my cubicle in tears. Her adored sister is moving across the country to be closer to her children. Suddenly it's the end of the world, Wanda is being abandoned, and now, in her words, I need to adopt her. She expects to be included in every family gathering, every concert or theater plan, and, oh yes, would like to join my spouse and me on vacations. The thought makes my skin crawl. Adopting my clingy, needy boss would destroy my marriage, my sanity, maybe even my will to live. Early retirement isn't an option, I simply can't afford it. At my age, there's no landing another role like this at my current salary. HR isn't remotely safe, nothing is confidential, and Wanda has made work miserable for others who tried that route. She couldn't easily fire me, civil service has its perks, but she could certainly make my professional life hell, just as she's done to others. So here I am, desperately seeking a way to establish boundaries with this woman before she infiltrates every corner of my personal life. Is it too late to regain control, or am I doomed to be Wanda's emotional caretaker until one of us retires, or dies first? Update 1. Allison responded to my letter, and her insights, along with those of so many readers, truly made a difference for me. I felt seen and understood in a way I hadn't expected. Wanda, is still entirely herself, but I've discovered a new sense of control in dealing with her. It became glaringly obvious that Wanda is masterful at making her wants known, not with directness, but with an arsenal of passive-aggressive manipulation. That hit me particularly hard because I grew up with a parent wielding the same manipulation, a pattern that led me to therapy for years. I see now that I'm much more vulnerable to this than I want to admit. All the advice helped me recognize just how deeply I'd been sucked back into a dynamic that haunted my younger years. The first thing I did was sit down with my husband, wanting him on board. I explained everything, and warned him that I'd be casting him in the role of a hopeless romantic demanding more couples-only time. We ended up laughing so hard at the absurdity, because let's face it, Bob is about as romantic as a box of hammers, but he instantly agreed to take the heat for me. That's just who he is, a good man who's got my back. When I submitted my vacation request for the summer and Wanda, with her typical arched eyebrow, asked, "And where are we going this year?" I played along with my new script. I sighed ruefully and said, "Bob is such a romantic, he insists we take a mini-moon every summer, just the two of us. He doesn't want anyone to know where we're going, not even our kids." Wanda pushed, even suggesting she could take the same week off, but I stuck to the plan, treating the whole thing like a joke. And you know what? It worked. Granted, the pandemic forced us to cancel our plans, but I'm proud to say the approach held up. I'll use it again when the world returns to normal. When the autumn concert series came around, Bob and I were excited. It's a tradition to go with our friends and it's one Wanda likes as well. She used to go with her sister before she moved. I graciously offered to include Wanda for the one performance we make a big group event. She immediately latched on, "Yes, I'll go to that one, and then you can come with me to all the rest." I replied, "Oh no, The rest are just dates for Bob and me. What can I say, he's an old school romantic who still loves taking me out. She pushed, of course. But putting the supposed blame on Bob worked wonders, especially since Wanda tends to believe every man is a scoundrel bent on frustrating her anyway. Redirection and deflection have become my favorite tools. A couple of months ago, Wanda stationed herself by my desk and launched into a familiar lament. My stupid brother wants me to give my mother's ring to his obnoxious stepdaughter at Easter dinner. She'll probably pawn it. I really don't want to go to their place for Easter. I wish I had somewhere else to go. Wouldn't it be nice if someone else invited me for the holiday? Without missing a beat, I replied, "Hey, did you hear Ferguson Legal sent back his edits on the llama herding policy document? He completely changed the meaning of the middle section. We'll be in violation of ordinance if we release it as is." Predictably, that completely derailed the Easter dinner talk for the rest of the day. I've learned to keep a few distractions in my back pocket. Thankfully, there's always some new crisis in our organization, but it pays off tenfold in shielding my personal life from Wanda's grasp. Strangely, the pandemic has been a blessing here, despite all the stress and tragedy. Social distancing finally made it possible to keep Wanda at arm's length. In our workplace, it's normally impossible to escape her. She's theoretically entitled to a private office, but insists on being out among the cubes close to her people. What that means in practice is she hovers, inserts herself into everyone's business, and makes escape impossible. But with telecommuting, she can't just drop by and trap me in my cube for hours anymore. We don't do video meetings, thank goodness, and suddenly I find that my productivity has skyrocketed. Of course there are phone conferences, but for whatever reason, my dog now wakes up and urgently needs to go outside for a potty break every time Wanda calls. So odd, but strangely convenient. I can't seem to talk for more than 5 or 10 minutes, just enough to cover the business at hand, before I have to dash outside. When Wanda veers off into another Easter dinner rant, Daisy's at the door, and I have no choice but to hang up. I'm not naive, I know eventually we'll all head back to the office, and Wanda will return to her spontaneous drop beats and manipulations, angling to be adopted into my life. But now, armed with these new strategies, I keep my oblivious meter set to maximum clueless. Let her try, I'm ready to let that manipulation bounce off completely. Update 2. What a surprise it was for me to see this whole situation resurface after all these years. It's hard to believe how much time has passed. 3 long, eventful years. Our work unit remained fully remote for over a year, which was absolutely glorious. Productivity soared, and even though our workload skyrocketed during the pandemic, somehow we managed to meet all our objectives with accuracy and timeliness. The rhythm of working from home became second nature to me. Bob and Daisy were constant companions and, honestly, they helped me gracefully sidestep Wanda and her relentless demands for friendship. Then, in mid-2021, everything changed. We were required to adopt a hybrid schedule, 2 days in the office, 3 days working remotely each week. I wasn't thrilled, but I tried to focus on the silver linings. Our in-office days were staggered, which meant the team was never all in the office simultaneously. And, by some small miracle, my assigned in-office days were completely different from Wanda's. I would have still preferred to be 100% remote, but not having to see Wanda in person made those trips into the office bearable. Of course, the needy, insistent phone calls didn't stop. Wanda's loneliness was palpable, her desperation to forge, or force, friendships with anyone, including her own staff, seeped through every interaction. Her oblivious meter seemed stuck at maximum clueless. No matter how subtly, or not so subtly, I tried to draw boundaries. Still, those boundaries held. I guarded my time and energy fiercely. By now, I'm sure you've picked up on my use of the past tense. About a year after we returned to hybrid work, Wanda's world was upended when her sister was diagnosed with a serious illness. Her sister's husband and adult children were overwhelmed by caregiving, and Wanda's anxiety about being so far away escalated dramatically. Ultimately, she took early retirement last fall, sold her house, and moved to the city where her sister lived. Every once in a while, I still hear from her. Most of her calls go straight to voicemail these days, and I'll respond by email. A day or 2 later, nothing rushed. My replies are always friendly but measured. I'm careful to maintain strict limits about what I share regarding my personal life and my family. I'm well aware that I'm under no obligation to interact with her at all anymore, but, honestly, I can't help feeling sorry for her. I know I can't fix anything for her, but I can demonstrate a little kindness. In the end, I truly believe the world would be a better place if we all brought a little more kindness to our interactions. As for me, I'm still working full-time, but now my own retirement is finally coming into view, just 6 to 9 months away. My days are spent writing endless process manuals, updating policy documents, training the rest of my team, and this year I've even been invited to serve on the search committee for my own replacement. Bob, my dear, but hopelessly unromantic, husband, retired in January, and he's been counting down the days until I join him so we can finally set off on our long dreamed of trip around the country. After Wanda moved across the country to be near her sister, Bob completely reworked our itinerary, determined to avoid that entire region, and I was thoroughly on board with that decision. He's especially eager to escape the reach of the landline. Since I don't own, or want, a cell phone, there's no way for Wanda to reach me once Bob and I are on the road together. That, honestly, might be the biggest perk of living the cell phone free life. Update 3. We'd been on the road for 5 weeks when the unexpected reached right into our witness protection for introverts routine. Bob had stopped at a gas station in Nebraska and, out of habit, decided to call home to check messages on the landline. I was in the passenger seat with a grocery sack of peaches, Daisy snoring like a freight train, when he came back to the car with a look reserved for tax audits and malfunctioning septic systems. "Hospital social worker," he said, "calling about your ward?" He meant healthcare proxy, but let's not pretend either of us expected those words strung together with my name and Wanda's. Here's what happened. Wanda had surgery, nothing life-threatening, but complicated enough that the hospital was rummaging through her paperwork. And there I was, apparently, neatly typed on a form as her healthcare proxy and primary emergency contact. 2-year-old documents. My name. My old office number. My landline. No one had my consent, and yet there I was, enshrined in ink. I don't own a cell phone, so I fed 3/4 into the last pay phone in North America and returned the call. The social worker was kind and harried in equal measure. She explained that in the absence of family stepping up, they were trying to reach me. Wanda had been clear on the forms, to be contacted immediately, adoptive family. I could hear the quotation marks. It was one of those moments when every nerve ending wanted to sprint in opposite directions, and yet I surprised myself by feeling very calm. I told the social worker I had never agreed to that role and would not be serving in it. I offered verified numbers for people who, unlike me, were actual relatives and had legal standing, and I told her everything I knew about Wanda's sister's situation. Her sister passed last winter, I found out on a Christmas card from a mutual colleague. It was sad, and it did not change my boundaries. The social worker took notes and, "This is how you know an absolute professional. Thank me for the clarity without so much as a sigh. We'll pursue next of kin and, if necessary, a temporary guardian," she said. "If Ms. Wanda requests to speak with you, may we pass along a message?" "Yes," I said, "but no hospital decisions, no permissions, no exceptions. Compassion in one hand, boundaries in the other." We drove on. Nebraska put itself behind us in that endless way Nebraska does. 2 days later, as we pulled into a motel in western Wyoming with a sign that promised hot water and deluxe continental, both ambitious claims, the front desk handed me a certified envelope that had been forwarded twice. Inside, a packet from a law firm enclosing copies of Wanda's proxy and power of attorney documents with a tidy cover letter asking me to confirm acceptance. I wrote back the next morning at the post office, a polite but unequivocal refusal and a request to remove my name from every page they had it printed on. I made myself a promise at that counter, stamp over my heart, there would be no more doing things just because a needy person decided I was the person to do them. A week later, a simple postcard found us, my name in Wanda's neat, schoolteacher script on the front, a view of a lighthouse on the back. The message was 2 sentences, "I was wrong to put you on those forms. I have removed your name." That was it. No flourishes, no invitations, no guilt. I sat on the motel bed with that little rectangle in my hands and felt something unclench that I didn't realize I'd been clenching since the first time she stood by my cubicle and called me her family. And just when I thought the curtain had finally fallen, the universe gave us one more act. We were on the coast 3 weeks later, the kind of town where the gulls are as brazen as pickpockets and every menu has a lobster roll that is either classic, elevated, or deconstructed, depending on the chef's patience and ego. Bob, ever the hopeless romantic, he brought me to a picnic table with a view of a dumpster, handed me a paper basket and a ginger ale and bumped my shoulder like we were teenagers. I looked up and there she was, 20 feet away in a windbreaker the color of wet cement, hair pulled back, talking to a woman I later learned was a grief counselor. She saw me. I saw her. We both stopped. Wanda walked over at a measured pace, her expression serious, not theatrical. "I'm not going to sit with you," she said without preamble. "I just wanted to tell you in person that I'm sorry for listing you. I have a case manager now. I'm learning." She gestured vaguely at the ocean. "This is a group day trip." The counselor gave me a professional half smile and kept a respectful distance. Daisy, traitor, wagged like they'd exchanged Christmas cards for years. If you think the old scripts didn't try to scramble back into my mouth, you don't know how old scripts work. But there's something about being on your 7th state park in as many weeks, about knowing you get to leave tomorrow with no detours you don't choose. I told her, "Thank you for saying that. I hope you're getting the support you need." She nodded, and for the first time in our acquaintance, she didn't pivot to turn my hope into a hook. She just nodded again, said, "Enjoy your trip," and went back to her group. We ate our lunch. Bob made some comment about the romance of plastic forks and sea spray, then ruined his case by rescuing a napkin with the reflexes of a second baseman. I watched Wanda and the others climb into a shuttle and disappear down the street. The gulls resumed their extortion attempts. Daisy stole a corner of my role. The world kept turning, and I felt light. There's no happily ever after here, not in the fairy tale sense. Wanda will always be Wanda. I will always be someone with a soft spot that needs a sturdy fence. But the fences held when it mattered. My oblivious meter has been recalibrated from maximum clueless to something better, maximum serenity, minimum access. We drive, we stop, we call home once a week from whatever pay phone the century forgot, and there are no more names of mine on paperwork that belongs to someone else's life. Update 4. We were somewhere between maces and a very optimistic roadside sign for homemade fudge when the postmaster in a town with one blinking light and 3 last names slid a glossy envelope across the counter to me like contraband. The return address was a conference hotel in a city we hadn't planned to see. Inside, a program with my name splashed on page 3 as the keynote speaker for the modern public servant: boundaries, belonging, and burnout. The blurb read like I'd written it in my sleep and given it to someone who thought ellipses were punctuation and personality. There was even a headshot. It was me, in that one blazer I own that photographs as municipal blue, cropped from an awards luncheon 5 years ago. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't even been asked. I fed quarters into a pay phone that smelled like sun-warmed pennies and called the number on the back of the program. A harried coordinator answered on the 3rd ring. I told her I was regrettably unable to deliver a keynote I had never agreed to give, and could she kindly tell me how my face had wandered onto her materials. It was submitted by our program chair, she said she was your, there was a tiny pause, a paper shuffle, colleague. Of course she did. Bob, who thinks a picnic table near an air compressor is date night ambience if the sky is pink enough, watched me put the receiver down and asked if we were detouring. We were. He suggested, magnanimously, that perhaps the hotel bar had something that passed for tapas. Daisy approved of any plan that involved carpet she was not allowed to nap on. We headed for the city with the envelope on the dashboard like a warrant. Conference hotels are all cousins, carpets loud enough to drown complaint, chandeliers like frosted jellyfish, music that is nobody's favorite leaking through several adjacent doors at once. The registration table was manned by a teenager with a summer job smile and a stack of lanyards in cautious colors. And there, at the end, in a blazer the color of compliance, was Wanda. She saw me. I watched her clock me, Bob at my shoulder, Daisy tugging toward a potted plant with existential determination, and I braced for an aria. What I got was something else entirely. She stood up straighter, sent the kid with the lanyards on an errand to the printer, and walked over. I shouldn't have put your name in the program, she said before I could open my mouth. I wanted to honor you. I convinced myself you'd say yes if I asked, so I. She made a small, enclosed motion with her hands, the international sign for, and then I did the thing anyway. She did not attempt to touch me, she did not append the sentence with the word family. Small miracles. No, I said. Honoring me would have been asking, and then believing my answer. I wasn't cruel, I was carved. You get tired of being a communal resource. She nodded, once, like the yes hurt but fit. In the normal run of my life, this is where we would have pivoted into one of her filibusters. Instead, 2 things happened at once. A fire alarm began to bleed in that way that makes you instantly doubt your dignity, and Bob, whose instinct in all emergencies is to locate the nearest exit and then the nearest snack, handed me my purse and said, "Out we go, Romeo and Juliet." We all spilled into the courtyard, city air and a sliver of sky, clusters of public servants blinking like rescued bats. The security guard shouted something about an overeager chafing dish. I stood under an overhang with a stream of people who'd learned the particular choreography of evacuating politely, and Wanda stood 6 feet to my left, hands in her pockets, looking at the middle distance the way you look at a thought you're not sure you can hold. Every so often, a stray bubble of keynote hope floated in from a cluster of attendees with tote bags. Is that? I let them pop on their own. When the bleeding stopped, the fire captain waved us back in with bureaucratic gravitas. Wanda walked with me to the threshold and said, simply, "I removed your session and sent a correction to the listserv." She tilted her head toward the ballroom doors. "We'll fill the slot with a panel. Boundaries and volunteer management. They won't miss a keynote. Nobody listens to those anyway." It was not a performance. It was administrative triage, which, to be fair, has always been her native language. I said, "Thank you for fixing it." She nodded. I glanced toward the registration table. A new sign had appeared in a plastic stand: "Program update, keynote cancelled." No adjectives. No explanation. We left. Bob found the tapas bar and did what he does best, made a plate of foods that bore no relation to one another and declared it a feast. Daisy, deeply insulted by the concept of no dogs allowed, retaliated by sleeping as loudly as a human. Later, because travel in our marriage is one long scavenger hunt for quaint, we walked 2 blocks to an independent theater showing a documentary about the history of road maps. Bob bought popcorn flavored like ambition and sea salt. We looked like a couple on a date who had misplaced romance and decided to make do with cartography. I can recommend it. The next morning, a housekeeping cart rattled past our door and spat out the daily paper. Wanda's conference had a little blurb in the Metro section, photo, caption, a quote from a deputy director about reimagining public service. In the corner of the photo I could see her shoulder, the exact line of that compliance blazer. No mention of me, no mention of anyone being adopted. And then my eye snagged on a name under the photo credit, not a staff photographer, but a freelancer I recognized as someone who used to cover our agency when I still had a badge. This is the sort of coincidence my life favors. When it rains relevantly. We were halfway back to the elevator when the pay phone in the lobby, yes, blessedly, improbably, they had one, shivered in that particular way that signals a call to action for those of us still living in analog. It was the front desk, asking me to pick up a message. A conference room number was scrawled on a slip, along with 2 words, 5 minutes. Against my better instincts, and with Bob's best theatrical eye roll, I went. The room was occupied by a woman in a cardigan who introduced herself as the conference's ethics officer. Apparently that's a thing now, and if it's not, it should be. She said, "I wanted to thank you for the clean boundary. We're building procedures around this, so future program chairs can't submit headshots and bios without a signed consent on file." She slid a template across the table. My old job self woke up and purred. It was tidy. It relied on process rather than virtue. It made it unnecessary to count on the restraint of the Wanda of the world because, as we both know, that's a currency you run out of quickly. And then, because the universe enjoys a callback, the ethics officer added, Wanda asked me to tell you she checked in with her therapist before she emailed the listserv. She said you'd find that relevant. I will neither confirm nor deny the undignified little laugh that escaped me. Relevant is doing a lot of work there. We put the city behind us and headed toward a pocket of mountains that had been nagging our atlas for years. On the way, we stopped in a little town that advertised trout, antiques, and nothing you could buy after 7 p.m. The post office had our mail in a bin with a rubber band around it, and at the bottom was a square envelope in Wanda's precise script, the kind you get when a teacher has a favorite pen and time. Inside, a single sheet. I meant it when I said I was sorry, it read. I joined a group that doesn't let me turn apologies into invitations. My homework was to tell you one thing without a hook. Here it is, I got a cat. His name is Philip. He hates everyone and that feels honest. I hope Nebraska kept its distance this time. I read it out loud on a bench outside while Daisy pretended not to hear the word cat. Bob, who is allergic to anything with an agenda and everything with whiskers, made a face for my benefit and then offered to celebrate the successful non-keynote by taking me to a diner that had been decorated in 1978 and never again. He is romantic in his own way, it just wears flannel. You could end the story there, in the way most things in my life end now, not with a bang, but with a boundary. But 2 days later, a message on our landline, the one I refused to forward to anything pocket-sized, pinged through when we called home from a gorgeous pay phone welded to a wrought iron stand in a plaza full of pigeons with better self-esteem than some people I've worked with. It was the harried social worker from months ago, the one who had plucked my name off hospital forms and set it gently back where it belonged. I wanted you to know, she said, in my line of work we don't get many clean stories. Ms. Wanda updated all of her forms and listed a local friend as her contact. She brought in her own copies and asked me to show her where the changes live in the database. She had a list. It was color-coded. I thought you'd appreciate the symmetry. I do. I appreciate it like I appreciate a well-edited manual and a dog who only pretends to ignore cats and a husband who can find the one diner in Nevada that still puts Jell-O in a glass cup like dignity never goes out of style. I appreciate it because this is as close to an ending as I'm likely to get, no grand reconciliation, no he'll turn into villainy. Just 2 people who once stood in a cubicle farm with opposite needs and very different ideas about what the word family allows, now occupying their own orbits with minimal gravity. She may always have the impulse to put me on a form. I now have a life arranged so that even if she does, the system will spit it out. Update 5. Retirement, as it turns out, looks exactly like every public sector celebration I've ever attended. A sheet cake with frosting that could grout tile, a vat of coffee that tastes faintly of budget cuts, and a balloon arch determined to achieve sentience. I turned in my badge and my parking pass, said the little speeches you say when you're relieved, enough to levitate but polite enough not to, and walked out with a banker's box of plants and pens and the last of my stash of decent tea. 2 hours later, the universe took boss who wanted to be adopted off my desk and replaced it with 16-year-old who didn't ask to be. And if you want to know how fast a retirement plan can pivot from national parks to grocery lists, the answer is, as fast as a phone ringing on a wall you refuse to carry in your pocket. Our daughter called from the other side of town. Emergency placement, short term, just for the weekend. She sounded breathless and hopeful and a little terrified in that way people sound when they're doing a brave thing on purpose. Do you and Dad have room at the table? She asked, and there's a question I have said yes to every time, in every decade. We turned the car around. Bob, in his eternal flannel, went straight for pasta and a jar of sauce the size of a bowling ball. Daisy inspected the guest room and elected herself hall monitor. We met a kid with a backpack full of everything and nothing, a face trained into neutral, and a name they told us like it might bounce off. I will call them Jay here because we live in a small town and because it fits the way they hold themselves, brief, lowercase, not taking up more space than strictly necessary. Here is what I know now, that I didn't know when I let Wanda stand in the doorway of my life and audition for family. Caretaking without permission is just theft with better lighting. With Jay, everything was negotiated, the brand of cereal, the quiet hours, the location of the towels, what counted as a closed door, who sat where at the table. Jay watched us watch them, and I could feel the little meter in my chest that used to read oblivious rebranded itself, maximum consent, minimum assumption. That first night, Jay ate 2 bowls, then a third, then a fourth with the unembarrassed speed of hunger that has met a warm kitchen. Bob, hopeless romantic that he is, made his declaration by fixing the loose hinge on the cabinet and announcing that the guest room lamp had finally accepted its lot in life and turned on without pleadings. We did what families do when the forms don't cover it. We bought a second toothbrush and learned where the skate park is and set up a schedule that somehow let Jay do algebra and also breathe. We did not ask questions we had not been given receipts for. The weekend stretched, as these things do. Jay's caseworker learned our names. We learned hers. We became experts in exactly how long Daisy can tolerate a hoverboard before staging a polite intervention. If you're waiting for Wanda to ride in on a cat in a crisis, that would make a tidy sequel and a messy week. What happened instead was smaller and, somehow, wilder. On day 8 of our 3-day weekend, the ethics officer from the conference, the Cardigan patron saint of procedures, called the landline. We've been asked to draft a statewide consent protocol for submissions and appearances, she said. We'd like your eye for the what if a Wanda scenario. She did not say those exact words, but the spirit was there, tidy as a checklist. I said yes, on the condition that my contribution fit on one page, that my name be used only if I signed next to it, and that any meetings happen in places with chairs that don't swivel. She laughed the dry laugh of someone who has wrestled an agenda and won. 3 weeks later, Jay and I sat in the back of a room in the state building that smells like floor wax and precedent while a dozen people with titles taller than their coffee cups argued amiably about commas. Bob and Daisy took the plaza outside, where Daisy fell in love with a statue of a pioneer and refused to be convinced otherwise. We were halfway through consent must be affirmative and verifiable when a window blinked to life on the screen at the front of the room. A remote speaker had joined, and I knew the voice before the sound system did. Apologies, said Wanda, with the flat affect of a person terrified of microphones. The community group I volunteer with asked me to provide the end-user perspective. I'm available for questions. I felt every old script line up for roll call. Then I checked on Jay, who was chewing on a cap and looking utterly bored. I want to tell you that helped. It did. Wanda, in a sensible cardigan and that same compliance-adjacent blazer from the conference, read calmly from her notes, the harm of assuming consent from familiarity, the relief of clear opt-in processes, the way an apology that doesn't include a changed behavior is just a story you tell yourself and other people. She looked nowhere near the camera and everywhere near her outline. If she saw me in the back row, she didn't flinch. Neither did I after, in the hallway with the heavy doors, the ethics officer passed me our draft, now with a cover sheet and a barcode and the look of something that has survived committee. Sign here if you consent to be listed as a contributor, she said, and if there has ever been a sweeter sentence in my professional life, I don't remember it. I signed. Jay peered over my shoulder and said, so you invented permission. I said, I wish, and we went outside to find Bob and Daisy in a standoff with a pioneer. Soon after that came a square envelope in the mail, Wanda's tidy script like a muscle memory. Inside, a donation acknowledgement from a local animal rescue, a note attached in her own hand. In honor of Daisy's patience, it read, and because Philip has decided he is not the only cat who deserves a second chance. No hook. No ask. Jay looked suitably unimpressed, Daisy looked smug, Bob said something about how romance is just attention with groceries, which is the kind of line he likes to drop when he's about to make pancakes for dinner. Life does the thing where it fills the available shape. My retirement tour map now has detours marked in pencil, court dates, caseworker meetings, algebra tutoring that makes me nostalgic for policies because at least those don't surprise you by turning into quadratic equations. We still drive, when we can. We still aim for towns with pay phones and bakeries and motels that promise hot water with a level of confidence not always entirely backed up by their plumbing. We still call the landline once a week and listen while the answering machine grinds through its little throat clearing. Last month, in a gym that doubles as a multi-purpose room and a polling place, Jay stood behind a folding table at a resource fair and answered questions from other kids about how to find a job that doesn't require you to pretend to be someone you're not. They handed out flyers the color of sherbet and said no as a full sentence to a boy with a shaved head and a laugh that stopped halfway up his throat. I brought coffee to the volunteer table and remembered every time I'd sat with my feet under a desk wishing someone would come along and remind me that my life did not belong to whoever wanted a piece of it. I did not tell Jay that story. That is the difference. They will write their own. If you want symmetry, here is a little. The consent protocol went out on the listserv last week, with a note about implementation and a link to a form that cannot be submitted without a box checked and a signature that matches a name. My name is there, exactly where I put it. So is Wanda's, in the reviewed by section with a title she must have chosen for herself because it is modest and accurate. No one cried. No one dragged a folding chair into my living room. Philip, according to a postcard with a photo of a cat who looks like a grievance in a fur coat, has accepted the existence of a second food bowl in his kitchen. Jay has accepted the existence of my insistence on breakfast, and I have accepted that there is joy in watching someone opt into belonging and then test the fence for themselves to be sure it holds. You could call that an ending, but I don't. It's just the next right-sized thing. The fence is up. The gate hinges are oiled. We open it on purpose and shut it on purpose, and the sign on it, hand-painted by a teenager with good sarcasm and better penmanship, says exactly what I wish someone had handed me the day I met Wanda by a cube farm. Welcome, by invitation. No adoptions at the door.